I'm Professor Susie Hess, the co-founder of Trauma Informed LA. I'm speaking today with Dr. Beth Ribet, the co-founder and director of Repair, a health and disability justice organization, about an upcoming training event, Rape After Consent, comprehending dynamics of severe sadistic sexual abuse. The training is on Monday, November 4th at 6:30 p.m. in Los Angeles and is located in Mercado La Paloma in the conference room at 3655 South Grand Avenue. It is open to the public and registration is online via Eventbrite. To get a ticket, visit the Repair website at repairconnect.org and visit the events page. So Beth, I'd like to ask you a few questions that may help the public understand the purpose of the event, starting with why rape after consent? Generally, people think of rape as non-consensual or forced sex. So what does rape after consent mean?
Susie, thanks so much for your collaboration in this event and for the question. So what I'd like folks to understand is that in sexual activity, the concept of consent is meant to be evolving, meaning that people can give and revoke consent at various times. So a classic example of an instance where two people might decide to engage in consensual sex and then nevertheless a rape could occur would be something like this. Two people decide they're going to have sex, they're both excited, they're both willing, and then one partner says, hey, I need you to use contraception. And the other partner says, no, I don't want to do that. And then the first partner says, well, then I don't want to have sex. And then he or she is forced. So, classically, we would see this happen, for instance, where we have a male partner who doesn't want to use a condom and a male or female partner who's not willing to have unprotected sex. And then the assault begins because the person who is refusing to wear the condom won't take no for an answer, right? So this is a sort of classic example, but one of the reasons that we decided it was important to host this particular training and start this conversation is because there are serial sexual predators who will find people to have consensual sex with and then will wind up attacking them, and that this is essentially their MO. And we think it's really, really important for stakeholders who work with victims of sexual violence, whether that, let's say, social workers, clinicians in mental health fields, first responders, emergency room staff, gynecologists, police officers, attorneys. There's so many stakeholders who need to be able to make sense of this kind of assault. And often what we find is that when someone has this kind of attack happen, the victim may be very confused about what to call it because basically they've been tremendously victimized and harmed by someone they actually started off intending to have consensual sex with. And so often the victims won't know whether to call it a rape or to think of it as a sexual assault. And if the stakeholders and service providers they're interacting with are not familiar with these dynamics, they also may not know how to make sense of what occurred or to assist the victim. So the training is in essence to help people understand that this is a phenomenon and that they're predators for whom this is actually a very common practice.
Okay, thank you so much. That makes sense. And the event title, it also references severe sexual sadism. So can you talk about what that means and how it's related to the idea of rape after consent?
Absolutely. So severe sexual sadism is a clinical term. It's a diagnosis. And it describes someone who is not just a sex offender, which is a legal concept, or a sexual predator, not just someone who is willing to engage in sexual violence. A severe sexual sadist is someone who specifically gets pleasure, derives sexual gratification from inflicting significant suffering on other people. So this is someone who is not just willing to engage in sexual violence, but has a very profound drive or motivation to do so because they enjoy it. And one of the things to understand is that people, and some folks would say, well, doesn't that describe any sexual predator or any rapist? I mean, obviously, if they're doing it, they probably enjoy it. And in many instances, that's true. But people can have different motivations for sexual aggression. For instance, there's some perpetrators of sexual assault or aggression where the primary motivation is sexual gratification. And if they can find someone they can have consensual sex with, then they're happy or they're satisfied. And if they are not, if they're encountering somebody who's resisting the attempt to have consensual sex, they're willing to use force. They're unethical and indifferent enough to another person that they're willing to engage in sexual assault, to become a rapist, or to attack that person to get what they want. But their end goal is basically sexual release. And there are also sexual predators for whom it's about control, or punishment. So, for instance, in the context of domestically violent or intimate partner violent relationships, you'll find people who will use sexual assault as a form of punishment or to hurt somebody who they're in a, greater pattern of control over. But they can get pleasure either from consensual sex or sex where they're inflicting suffering. In contrast, a severe sexual sadist is certainly someone who likes control and who has sexual drives typically or wants sexual gratification. But the point there is that there's an extra motivation. This is a person who's never going to be completely satisfied or as satisfied with consensual sex because suffering itself is the goal. This is a person who gets pleasure, sexual pleasure, from inflicting suffering. And so a severe sexual sadist who doesn't want to get caught, who doesn't want to be reported and potentially arrested and prosecuted and convicted or sentenced, is somebody who's going to want to find a way to go about their practices without fitting people's classic expectations of what a rapist does. And so some of these predators will develop the habit of, again, finding consensual sexual partners, whether it's in an ongoing relationship that then becomes abusive or by serial dating, and then attacking those partners based on the assumption that they will not be reported, and if they are, that the report won't be taken seriously because so many people are confused by the idea of a rape occurring when consensual sex was already in progress.
Wow. Who will be involved in this training? So
there are 3 panelists. I'm one of them, and as you know, you are our intrepid chair and moderator. And we're going to be joined by 2 other people. One is a community sexual health educator by the name of Jackie Latta, who's going to be coming in to tell our audience more about the concepts of consent and the ways in which consent is negotiated, what is or is not consensual. And it's good to actually have those basic definitions and then to complicate them, and that's essentially what she does very well for a living. So I'm really excited to share the space with her. And then our third panelist is an officer with the Los Angeles Police Department. She's specifically a lieutenant from the Pacific Division, and her name is Lieutenant Marie Fellhauer. And one of the reasons we're excited to collaborate with her in this training is because she's somebody who's really given some careful thought to extremely diligent, nuanced reporting. She's someone I would trust to understand the legal definitions of sexual assault very well, and to also understand how to go about reporting this type of assault. And so it's really valuable to have her in on this training because she's going to be a fantastic guide to other law enforcement professionals and also to those who may accompany victims, whether they're friends or support people, victims advocates, social workers, who need to understand what are the best practices generally in sexual assault reporting and especially with this type of assault. So together we comprise the training team for this event, and again, I'm really excited to be working with this team because I think we're going to be pretty effective together.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm looking forward to meeting the panelists as well. Who do you recommend should attend?
So we really want to turn out those who are working directly with survivors of sexual abuse, including this form of sexual abuse. And so examples of that I mentioned earlier would include nurses, physicians, particularly gynecologists, but also ER staff or anybody dealing with trauma, can include primary care providers, social workers, MFTs and other mental health clinicians, and we want folks involved in sexual assault reporting, investigation, and prosecution involved, so certainly law enforcement and first responders, paramedics, and so forth. So we'd be glad to have any of those folks in the audience. I would also say that certainly if you have a general interest in the subject and your life has been affected by this kind of abuse, whether it is something that happened to you or someone else that you care for, you are entirely welcome at this event. I just want to forewarn folks that obviously the subject matter may be very triggering for trauma survivors. And of course, we'll announce that there as well. But in essence, everybody who cares about stopping violence, responding to violence, and comprehending and having effective responses to treat violence and the trauma it creates are extremely welcome at the event.
Thank you so much. And just to let you know, both Trauma Informed LA and NASW USC unit are continuing to program about trauma and healing, and we are all very excited to be part of this event.
Yeah, Repair is really excited to collaborate and I'm really glad that we're moving ahead with this training, as difficult as the subject is, and I'm looking forward to seeing hopefully a lot of folks turn out for Monday, November 4th.